Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to welcome you to our session looking beyond survival, where we're exploring how looking at protracted crises in particular through a holistic view of people's well-being can contribute to more responsive and more people-centered humanitarian action. And just as a bit of background to the session, over recent decades, crisis-affected people have consistently emphasized that the humanitarian assistance they receive is not in line with their most urgent needs and priorities. And at one level, this trend can be seen as a reflection of the gap between increasing levels of need and the resources available to meet them, or it can highlight the limited ability of humanitarian assistance to deal with the root causes and drivers of crises. But we think it does also point to an additional issue, and that is that humanitarian assistance, as currently delivered, often fails to engage substantively with people's desires and with their aspiration and with their agency beyond questions of basic survival. So regardless of the difficult circumstances that people find themselves in, people strive not just to exist, but to live in ways that they feel have meaning and have value. Meanwhile, the focus of humanitarian aid tends to be restricted to meeting biological or material requirements of keeping people alive in the most efficient way possible. And this can leave substantial chunks of the human experience, such as religious observance or intimacy, or even having a basic sense of agency, sort of invisible or out of scope to humanitarian actors. And these things often either get sidelined completely or engaged with as problems to solve or means to other ends. But especially in protracted crises, when humanitarian action starts to form part of the background and the structure of people's daily lives, the decisions made by humanitarian actors can have a major impact on these factors that might otherwise be out of scope, and can end up defining not just whether people live or not, but the kinds of lives that they are able to live. And why is this an issue? We think that without taking better account of people's own efforts to achieve well-being and to live a meaningful, flourishing life, humanitarian aid can end up falling short on three counts. First, it can fail on its own terms. So programming that doesn't engage with the complex and interconnected priorities of people's lives as they actually live them can end up being quite ineffective or inefficient. Second, it can cause significant harms when humanitarian ways of working actively undermine affected people's efforts to reestablish a normal life. And third, it can lead to missed opportunities for humanitarian actors to more effectively support people's well-being when they're in a position to do so. And so today we're going to explore in various ways how thinking and working beyond questions of survival can help shift analysis and action from a quite top-down and quite siloed focus on things that crisis-affected people lack or the problems they experience, and towards a more holistic approach that centers them as agents struggling to live well on their own terms. We've got a really interesting panel this morning who are going to present. We're going to start with Boel Makatir from the International Institute of Environment and Development, who's going to be taking us through their work developing ways to understand and measure well-being beyond basic needs. We're then going to speak with John Warnes from UNHCR's Innovation Unit, who's going to be exploring the role that leisure played in displaced people's engagement with digital technologies and how this stacks up against the sort of more utilitarian ways that technology tends to be understood and deployed by the aid sector. Third, from a practitioner perspective, we're joined by Salada Liban, who's the CEO of Community Initiative Facilitation Assistance Kenya, or CIFA, who's going to take us through how survivor and community-led response methodologies help communities both meet their urgent needs and pursue long-term objectives in line with what matters most to them rather than donors or aid agencies. Finally, Professor Lauren Carruth of American University, and I just want to acknowledge that it is currently 3 a.m. for her, so thank you very much, Lauren, for being here, is going to offer reflections on how principles for action and ways of seeing the world among local people and local aid workers are often just as important to effective humanitarian action as those that the international humanitarian system sees as essential to its mission. We're then going to hand over to questions from the floor and discussion within the panel, and that's going to be chaired by Lucy Earle, who's also with IIED. And for that, we're also going to be joined by an independent researcher who's working with IIED, Jacqueline Wanyoni, who's going to provide some reflections on methodology and some experiences of working in the field. Some very, very small pieces of housekeeping before we start. From the audience, we'd love to hear your perspectives. If you're in the room, please raise your hand during the Q&A sessions and we'll come around with the mic. For those of you online, please share your thoughts and reflections in the chat. And if you have a question in the panel, use the Q&A box to send these in. For online audiences, closed captions are available. Please access these by clicking on the button at the bottom of your screen. And just a final reminder that this event is being recorded. The video will be available on the event webpage in a couple of days' time, and you can listen to the discussion through the ODI event podcast channel. I'm now going to hand this slightly heavy microphone over to Boel to start us off.
Thank you. Appreciate the wait warning. Can you hear me okay? I'll take that as a yes. So there we go. Thank you. I've called this Beyond Basic Needs, along the same lines of Beyond Survival, because basic needs is where it tends to go in humanitarian settings, and especially for refugees. But we all need more than that to live, don't we, as human beings, and that's no different for refugees. We all need more than food and water and a roof over our heads. We also need social connections and hopes and aspirations. We need to feel like we're doing something useful with ourselves. And that's the focus here. But there's always a sort of assumption when it comes to refugees that everything is temporary. I think that's a key problem, where we're thinking that eventually, because they are refugees by nature, they will eventually leave or go somewhere else, or you know, be somewhere else and be somebody else's problem, essentially. So we just have to take care of them for the time being with basic needs, with survival, and then everything else will work itself out. We know by now very often that just doesn't happen. People don't leave. Very often conflicts go on. It can be 10, 20, 30 years later, and you're still in that survival mode. So I think the proposition today is what if we ignore that? What if we say that time limit doesn't matter? What if from day one, it should be about more than just surviving from the beginning? Still, we need more than basic needs. So I'm going to talk you through some of the research that IAD has been doing on well-being in protracted displacement. So this is a project called Protracted Displacement in an Urban World. It's a 3.5-year project funded by the UK government, Global Challenges Research Fund. And it's a camp-urban comparison of refugees in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Jordan, and internally displaced people, or IDPs, in Afghanistan. So we've gathered some data on what we think that might look like if we expand the basic needs. And we've produced a refugee well-being metric with 5 dimensions that I will go through in some more detail in a minute. But first, I'm going to quickly talk you through our fieldwork locations. Thank you. So in Kenya, we've got Nairobi and Dadaab. And in Ethiopia, we've got Addis Ababa and Asaita camp, which is in the north in the Afar region. In Jordan, we're looking at Amman and Zaatari. And in Afghanistan, it's Jalalabad and Barikab settlement, which is a settlement just outside of Kabul for internally displaced people there. So we have a survey of over 4,000 people that includes refugees in camps, refugees in urban areas, and also hosts in urban areas, with a range of questions on well-being and livelihoods. We also have qualitative interviews with refugees in both locations, so we can add some flavor to what's in the survey. And based on that, we've created the well-being metric. So that's the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the bulk really of what I wanted to talk to you about today. I appreciate it's quite small on the screen there, but we'll go through the dimensions from the top, starting with the bodily well-being. That's where you get some of your traditional basic needs. So physical health, access to housing, clean water, sanitation, food and nutrition, and also physical safety. But even in the sort of traditional, what do you have basic needs wise in this dimension, there is an element of self-assessment. Like, how do you feel about this? How do you feel your health needs are addressed? That's included in our survey. So going on to the next one, economic well-being, also sort of usual suspects, financial health and income, debt, any savings, any assets, any access to financial services, which is often a problem for refugees. Moving on to political well-being. So now we're slightly outside of what's normally measured in a sort of basic needs setting. So again, safety and security, but more the sort of structure around it, like are police present? Are they able to help you? Access to justice, legal status, very important for refugees, access to information around your own rights and right to work, etc. Civic engagement and participation, and political representations. Do you have somewhere to go with your issues? Are you connected to local authorities, for example? Are you connected to camp management? Do you have structures where do you know where to go if you have a problem with something? And what's that like for different people? Fourth dimension, social well-being, includes, of course, social support, which can be mosques, churches, community groups, connectivity with family and friends. Of course, that will often involve internet, phone connections, electricity. Do you have the networks there to access that? Also leisure time and leisure space, not included there, but do you have a physical space to do what you want to do? If you like to play football, or you like to, whatever you like to do in your spare time, do you have the time to do it? Or do you spend all your time worrying about your basic needs? And do you have the space to do it? And finally, fifth one, psychosocial well-being. So that includes the Warwick Edinburgh Wellbeing Scale, for those familiar with that. Life satisfaction and mental health. Feeling at home. How are you feeling about the place you're in? Do you feel optimistic towards the future? Both for yourself, but also for future generations. How do you feel about the kids in your community? Are they going to fare better than you are? Do you feel respected and independent in the community where you live? And do you feel that you are able to spend your time constructively on something that you like spending it on? So these are the important parts, I think. Is also something in how are these linked together. So we're not saying let's move away from basic needs. We're saying there's all of these additional factors that will also impact your physical health and your mental health and all of these other issues around you. So how do we avoid, for anybody who was in the ODI session yesterday, how do we avoid silos? How do we avoid each of these being treated as separate issues? And how do we treat it as a whole, as well-being issues as a whole? So in terms of findings, we have a lot, so I'm not gonna attempt to go through everything. I just wanted to give you a little flavor here. So these are the types of graphs that we can produce. So this is well-being overall, all 5 dimensions in Kenya and Ethiopia. So the red here is the camp and the blue is the urban. So we can see in these 2 countries our hypothesis, which we came into this research with, that camps are not serving anybody really. And refugees are better off in the urban, is very clearly shown here in terms of well-being. If we split the dimensions out, I haven't brought all of the 50,000 graphs with me today, but if we split the sections out, you can see very interesting differences between the dimensions. And I think somewhat ironically, if you think from a humanitarian perspective, it's really in the basic needs that the camps tend to fail, that the bodily well-being and the economic well-being, those tend to be the lowest in the camp setting. of course, there's an element of self-selection there, and that you might be more likely to be in a camp if you do have physical ailments, or if you're not able to work. But there is also a sense of, especially in Kenya and Ethiopia, that these camps have been around for a really long time, and the funding has run so low that the food provided is not enough and the work is not there. So people are quite literally starving and not able to leave. Jordan is a slightly different story. Zata is a different camp, and I think a relatively well-funded one. So there's much less difference between the camp and the urban there. I think there's also interesting explanations to do with where humanitarian support is provided in the camp and in the urban. It's not such a drastic, like in Kenya and Ethiopia, urban refugees tend to be completely on their own with nothing, and they still do a lot better, which is interesting. And Afghanistan is, of course, a different case in itself, both because it's not refugees, it's internally displaced people, and also because of the changes that we've seen in the recent years with the Taliban takeovers. Everything has changed very drastically for everyone, especially around poverty. Everything is a lot worse for everyone in Afghanistan, but you still tend to see camp urban differences where it's definitely worse in the sort of remoteness of the camp. I think I will stop there and leave room for questions and others. But main message there is there's a lot to focus on beyond survival and beyond basic needs. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Boel. We're going to take questions at the end, so I'll hand straight over to John Warnes from UNHCR so we can take you through the digital ledger as well. You, John.
Hi, thanks very much. Just checking everybody can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Great, good to be here, and I will keep this brief and building off a lot of Bo's commentary earlier. So in UNHCR, we've had a number of interventions over the years looking at how we engage with digital technology and connectivity for forcibly displaced and stateless people. These efforts have evolved over time from the Mediterranean situation with refugees fleeing Syria, where digital technology came into the spotlight from a wider group of individual organizations, media, and the global public, and through COVID-19 was, really hit center stage as physical restrictions were put in place. And humanitarian organizations relying on digital technology more than ever before to provide humanitarian assistance, engage with communities, and explore solutions. In UNHCR, we've evolved our approaches over time, and we have a forthcoming digital strategy which actually outlines a number of different ways that UNHCR will be taking forward digital interventions. However, for a number of years, UNHCR's Innovation Service has been supporting and exploring innovative solutions to digital inclusion through a dedicated program of the same name. And I'd just like to provide a bit of background, because when we really started this program, it really looked traditionally much more on the infrastructure side around connectivity solutions, and over time grew to a broader approach that looked at skills building, legal and regulatory barriers to access and beyond. And as part of this program, we wanted to make sure that we took a very community-centered approach and understood or aimed to understand through field research what types of issues were important to communities, and what their needs were in terms of digital technology, information communication needs, and more. And through our research over the years, we found that while there are a number of use cases, and most traditionally a lot of this research did have goals around understanding deeper around educational needs or financial, economic needs, and so on. The striking figures are actually that the majority of people were using mobile devices to access leisure and entertainment. In 2019, research conducted with the GSMA found that mobile users in Bidi Bidi refugee settlement in Uganda and in Kiziba in Rwanda stood at 60 to 70%. This is beyond simple use cases around getting in touch with friends and family. In 2021, further sort of research by UNHCR in West Africa, across Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, and Niger, refugees again frequently were citing social media, mobile apps, games, music, and videos as being primary use cases for mobile technology in their lives. And more recently, another piece of work with the GSMA, the Digital Worlds of Forcibly Displaced People, took a more specific focus on digital leisure and looked at, in a bit more intricate detail, how mobile phone users in Lebanon, Papua New Guinea, and South Sudan were engaging with leisure and entertainment needs on the devices. So we've seen quite consistently that this is going forward, yet in much humanitarian digital programming, an emphasis remains on the more utilitarian types of approaches from financial economic inclusion, education, access to protection. And there's something of a discrepancy there. And this is something that UNHCR's Innovation Service sort of started to think more deeply about, because not only do we take a rights-based approach, which Oliver mentioned at the beginning, that prioritizes the choice and agency of individuals and their rights to be part of a connected society, what they choose to do with it. But the team also had a very personal connection to this, given that many of our own lives have been impacted by digital technology quite fundamentally, grounded in family relationships, connections, leisure, and entertainment. And to this end, we decided we needed to dig a little deeper into this. Our findings from the previous research were relatively superficial. And this is where we got linked up with Payal Arora, author of The Next Billion Users, Digital Life Beyond the West. And immediately her bridging of connections between leisure and poverty and the future of the internet chimed a chord with the Innovation Service. And as such, we moved forward with a partnership between our team and the Erasmus University of Rotterdam to look more deeply at the digital leisure divide faced by forcibly displaced people. Why should leisure be beyond the scope of interest for forcibly displaced people? Why should it be deprioritized compared with some of the more foundational, like basic need elements that were referenced in the first presentation? In essence, there's no reason why the people we're supporting with humanitarian assistance are any different from you or I, and the priorities we found consistently the same. So to this end, we built out a project that started with desk research and then evolved into primary field research. And we have a new report that we'll be launching today. May be able to share the link in the chat in a bit, that actually highlights the finding from this primary research that was undertaken in Brazil, which spanned interviews, focus group discussions, social media mapping, and a week-long co-creation workshop with a videographer with forcibly displaced communities, refugees and migrants from Venezuela, who were telling their stories around how they use digital technology in their lives through video. I'm not going to go into great detail on the methodology here, given the lack of time, but I wanted to bring forward 5 interesting findings from this research that will give the audience a taste of some of the findings in the report, but I would encourage you all to go and read it to dig deeper into it. So the first finding from these sessions in Brazil was that physical spaces and digital spaces have a fundamental impact on leisure and well-being of individuals. Given the way that individuals use these devices, which is when it comes to leisure, sometimes communal activity, in many cases, it's a desire for privacy to hold private relationships, conduct them online, to undertake activities that perhaps are more in-depth linked to their hobbies or other private sort of concepts of device usage. And this challenges some of the traditional go-to approaches that have been undertaken in the humanitarian sector around, for instance, connected community centres, which are prevalent across many humanitarian operations, and how they may fall short of individuals' desire for privacy to have safe physical spaces and private physical spaces to get online and be connected. And similarly, in digital spaces, that these spaces exist for people to freely talk and self-actualize, and that they don't feel restricted. We know that there are a number of barriers and challenges that many communities face in that regard. Second finding that I wanted to share was that in spite of, for instance, economic barriers preventing a number of individuals from accessing or owning their own devices or purchasing expansive data plans, that actually leisure adapts to those circumstances, and that individuals will share their devices, they will lend their devices to other community members to access these simple acts of leisure and entertainment. They will find ways of minimizing data costs, undertaking leisure activities maybe that are more suited to low bandwidth applications like music shared on SD cards, as opposed to continuously watching videos on YouTube. So that, there's no hierarchy here. Leisure will find a way, and the communities adapt to their circumstance economically to be able to find pathways to leisure. The third finding to cover is around digital leisure forming connections. This was clear from the research that the space that's provided for building connections, both internally within a community that's displaced, new connections with their family members in the country of origin, was absolutely critical, and that this cannot be understated in its importance. To build long distance bonding between individuals and create new senses of community where maybe physical communities in their immediate vicinity are somewhat lacking in the immediate circumstance. And this was voiced strongly from the participants. But also connections go beyond people, and that people were using their devices to connect with things that they love, that were things like hobbies, news, interests, things that people were really passionate about. And the research demonstrates in detail through the videos created through the workshop, the type of things that the individuals were passionate about in their lives, and how digital technologies are a gateway for them to live that, whether that was beauty and cosmetics, which one woman was highlighting as a priority, or video games, which was another important part of another individual's. Finding number 4 was that there's actually, while not intended at the outset of this, an actual link between leisure and aspirations that are linked more economically, but also social. So this is individuals being able to use their leisure experiences within social media to actually build wider networks, to get to know more people, to contribute to their communities, as well as economically, to potentially undertake business with a wider group of individuals, sell products, provide value to the community that they're in and the wider global community. And many individuals definitely believe that some of these activities they were doing in the leisure space would actually help them move and grow in these sorts of ways and help them achieve their aspirations. And then finding number 5 was around notions of intimacy. And this was something that is often shied away from within many of the sort of assessments that have been done regards to use of digital technology, is that people conducting sort of romantic relationships, family affairs through online channels and digital spaces, and the challenges that come with this, both the positive dimensions, such as building new relationships, getting to know individuals, but also risks that may come when you're sharing a device. People are concerned about sharing devices when they are perhaps engaged in very private conversations. Problem with rumor mills, who to trust, and potential malicious actors in online spaces, and that people need to feel free and safe to conduct these affairs. So that's just a snapshot of some of the findings from this research. And we'll be sharing the report very soon for people's review. And we'd love to hear from you if you're interested in these areas. It's very much the beginning of this journey. We're excited about the next steps and working collaboratively with many of us in this area. Thanks very much, and back to you, Ollie.
So much, John. We've put the first report from that series in the chat along with the GSMA report you referenced, and really excited to see the more in-depth findings when they come out. Salad, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Salad Libanarero. I come from northern Kenya, from Marsabit County, in one of the most remote districts, counties in the country. Yeah, I work for an organization called CIFA, Community Initiative Facilitation and Assistance. We came out of Farm Africa. Farm Africa was operating in northern Kenya, in Samburu and Marsabit County. And at the phase out, they thought maybe that they needed some organizations on the ground as an exit strategy for the livestock project, and then that's how CIFA came up. We were registered in we came up in 1999, and we were registered in the year 2000 with the government of Kenya. And since then we've grown. We are also registered in UK as a charitable organization, and we also in Ethiopia. We have CIFA Kenya and CIFA Ethiopia. Yeah, CIFA Ethiopia is currently an independent organization, and we also. You cannot hear me? Yeah. I come from Marsabit County, yeah, in northern Kenya. That is where I work. My name is Salad Liban. It's an opportunity for me. I had never thought that I will come to such a high level platform to talk about my organization, but I thank Christian Ed for making this possible. Yeah, my name is Salad Liban. Then we are registered in Kenya as CIFA, Community Initiative Facilitation and Assistance. From day one, our ideas was to facilitate and assist on community initiatives. That is why we are called Community Facilitation and Assistance. We are also registered in Ethiopia as an independent organization, a humanitarian organization working in Ethiopia. Okay. I come from Marsabit County, and Marsabit County is known for all the odds. Yeah, I come from a community. Marsabit County is the largest county in Kenya, and with the most is the most diverse. We have around 17 tribes living in the region. It's volatile. There's high levels. We always have conflicts. There's presence of large numbers of illegal firearms, harsh climatic conditions, high poverty levels, all kinds of problems. Like right now, as I come, we just came out of a very bad situation. 5th failed season that ended with also floods. As we speak, we are having floods in our area, and after flood then came cholera. I come from a county where 60% of the population is depending on food aid. We must be given food aid, and that's around 361,000, which is 60% of the population who are dependent on food aid. And we have lost approximately 80% of the livelihoods. We lost all the stock, and even the few remaining ones were taken away by the floods. So that is the situation in Marsabit County. And one other characteristic about Marsabit County that I would like to talk about is that this is a community that has lost confidence in the government over the years. We have livestock, and for you to have the livestock, these are 17 ethnic communities. Everybody must protect their stock. We are in a situation where maybe you have 200 heads of cattle because your friend has lost a similar number previously. So people go for arms. This presence of large number of legal firearms. As we speak right now, all the livestock is gone. People are left with, they are left with the guns only. So what happens in such a situation? The 20% of the livestock, people who have remained with livestock are in a very bad situation. People have gone to streets to use the guns, maybe to look for food. I have a scar here. It was a bullet. In February, as I was going for some work in Loyangalani, somebody just came to the road and shot. See, maybe if you can find something to eat. That is what the situation looks like in my place. We don't have the stock, 80% is gone. And now the people have remained only with the guns. You can think of what happens in such a situation. You have the children to feed and everything. So we are in this kind of situation. But as I said, as our name maybe entails, I said community facilitation and assistance. That is what we were from the beginning. But until 2019, we were not able to do anything as explained by our name. That what happens normally is that maybe there's a call for proposal. Every instruction is given in the call for proposal. Then you are told, okay, there is this amount of money. This is the call for. These are the outcomes and these are the outputs. Yes, we have the ideas. We know what is good for our people, but we cannot go outside that. That is the way things have been going since from day one. We get the money, we implement the projects. We came to a time whereby we could not, we don't see any results. We have spent a lot of money in the community and we don't see any results. I remember one time around 2006, EU was asking a question. We have injected all this money into the community. The community is becoming more vulnerable. There's increased poverty. Why is this happening? At such, maybe a consultant was hired at the time, and then he came out and he said that maybe the reasons why we don't have result is because, in fact, what we were trying to do was not even the community's priority. We knew it, and in fact, Christian Aid was able to come with the solutions in 2019. They came in with this SCLR approach, community-led approach, transferring power to the people, transferring power to the small organizations like us. This is why you see me in Geneva today. I had never thought I'll be here. Okay, they are transferring power to us and we are transferring power to the communities through the SCLR project. Yeah, if I can go through SCLR a little, what is SCLR? I think everybody understands, but maybe I can I talk about? Yeah.
Say with that.
Yeah, SCLR means survivor community led response. What happens in the times of emergencies? Groups come out. So it is, what does it do? Community-led response seeks to enable external aid actors to connect with support and strengthen crisis response identified, defined, implemented, and monitored by existing of new self-help groups among crisis-affected communities. What happens is that even in such a situation, when there's crisis, the communities have to, they try to do something. What we do is that we look for these groups. What are they doing? How are they trying to cope up with the situation? So we look for these groups and we work through these groups, at least to help the communities. What are the benefits? The benefit is that through the SCLR, at least we're able to strengthen the sense of dignity because it's community initiated. Communities do their own things. We are only doing the facilitation. There's that sense of dignity, there's that self-worth, and the connectedness, the social cohesion. What are we looking at when we say social cohesion is that we are looking for projects that helps the groups and maybe the larger community. And that extends to the larger community. And the broader well-being of the survivors. That is the benefit. And then we initiate long-term people-led response aimed at tackling the root causes of vulnerability. What we do is that we build the capacity of the community. We build their capacity to identify the root causes of their problems. And that is what we address through the SLR project. And then it's more responsive, varied, and context sensitive, because it deals with the context itself. We help the communities identify the context at that time and the context in the future. That's what we do. And then the other benefit is that it improves social cohesion, because they look for the most vulnerable members of the community. They're all brought on board, and this is how we work with the SLR project. SCLR project is not a solution to everything. We work with other projects. We have the PRA, Participatory Rural Appraisals, also funded by Christian Aid. And we also have the triple nexus approach. Because we are working in a conflict-prone area, we also work with SCLR, works hand in hand with this triple nexus project. What are the components? The first component is participatory actual learning in crisis. This is what we call the PALC. The PALC, we identify members of the community, some elect members of the community who are able to help the community understand the project. We train these guys, and then these guys go back to the community, and then they train the community to help them identify the problems that affect them. So as partners, as maybe as an external agency, we leave everything to the community. These packs are based within the community, although they are our employees, we pay them, and then they train the community. Then from that, the second component is the systems for rapid, accountable, and do no harm use of group microgrants as one of the means to enable and scale up collective actions. What we do is that when the communities come identify their problems, we also encourage them to look for solutions to their problems. The SCLR approach comes with the what do you call it? The safeguarding issue. There is this safeguarding issue. Before, when we come to the communities, we cannot talk about the communities cannot talk about us. They cannot complain about us. We bring ideas that they have to take. But of course, we don't get results because they don't tell us that this is not our priority. But with the SLR project, what happens is the community have a toll-free line. The community has a toll-free line. So, and what they do, when they have any complaints, they can complain about us to Christian Aid. If there are problems with Christian Aid Nairobi, the community has direct link with Christian Aid UK. So it was not like before. And so, previously, you may not be doing the right thing, but what happens is that the community, they cannot, they don't know where to complain to. So that is it. It encourages that accountability and transparency. There's a rapid provision of demand-led crisis. We respond very fast. But under the SCLR project, what we do is funds are released by the donor within 48 hours, and that is what we do. So when there is a crisis, there's that early response. There will be no wastage of time. At least we will be able to save life under this approach. And then there's that active linking. We are working with several self-help groups within the community. So there's that aspect of linkage. We create linkage within the communities, different communities that maybe that have been working previously. And then it's in a protracted disaster response that involves multiple local self-help groups, agencies, support for the development of locally relevant mechanisms. The communities are able to learn from one another. What is working for one community may not be able to work for another community. So this is how it is working for us. Then there's the promoting change in organizational and institutional relationship to become a standard good practice in humanitarian good programming. SCLR, I think, is a standard good practice, and with the approaches, it gives you a time for exit, because you will not be responding to humanitarian situations at all times. So that is what happens. And then we have, I also want to talk about the core steps.
Just because of,
Yeah. Yeah, okay, 2 minutes. Okay, so we started working with the Christian Aid in 2019. They introduced the CLR to CIFA in 2019. Since then, we have seen a good result. Okay, it was we have received the first 50,000 and the second 50,000. And we have implemented. It was rightly timed. We implemented this project at a time when it was needed most. We were in our worst situations in 40 years. Okay, we were able to identify 10 communities under the CLR project, and we are seeing results. Christian Aid is already funding other organizations, other partners in other areas, and they're coming to learn from us, all the way from even Haiti, Nigeria, and Ethiopia, to come and learn from the successes that we have achieved as CIFA. Yes, still we have observations, and what we observed under the CLR project is the increased sense of ownership. We are seeing improved accountability. We are seeing improved coordination within the community. And it provides opportunities for the communities to discuss and find solutions to their problems. It unlocks the potential of the community, at least because the community can talk together, at least they can see their potential. And then it provides the opportunity for the improves resilience in the face of the climate change. We are being worst hit by climate change, and at least the communities are through the SCL project, they have started accepting. But previously, when you talk to the community, they will tell you that maybe God is punishing us, and it's hard to convince the community that the impact of climate change. Then at least we see value for money, we see inclusiveness, and we see a possible end to emergencies in the future if we continue with the CLR project. Okay, we have gaps, we have challenges. Lately, like for me, we are 23 years old. Some of my vehicles that I'm using to implement my project in the largest county in the district is around 23 years old. My newest vehicle is around 320,000 kilometers. And I am supposed to be, I had taken a mandate from the Christian Aid or maybe other donors, and I have to implement these same vehicles. Some are 500,000, some are 300,000. You are trying to respond to a very tough situation. Your vehicle is old. You have a breakdown in the road. You cannot help yourself. So Christian Aid does not take care of that. You talk to every donor, they tell you we don't give vehicles, and they want you to implement the project. Yeah, the biggest challenge we have today is that our vehicles are old and tired, all of them. You send this one here, it gets breakdown, then another one somewhere to attend to some critical situation, it gets breakdown. And I think if we start thinking along that line, facilitating us to be able to implement these projects, I think it will not be very hard. We understand the situations. We know how we can solve the problems of our people if such small things are solved. The resources are not enough. You are attending to 10 communities, and maybe you have around 17 ethnic groups to attend to. You can think of a situation maybe where you have supported one group and you are unable to support the other group. Of course, it creates conflicts. So I think we need to think bigger, and if we are facilitated. At least I think we know the problem of our people. Our people know their problems. Then we can get solutions in the future. At least they could adapt and move on. Yeah.
I think we're going to have to stop it there, but thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, I may be a little excited because this is a very high level. I come from some small organization. I know you'll understand me.
Absolutely. No, and so there are a couple of reports that Lizzie has shared in the chat about CIFA's experience and other examples of survivor and community-led response in other parts of the world as well. But I think the lesson of facilitating communities to reach their own solutions and facilitating local organizations who support them is extremely important. I'm going to turn over to Lauren to look at this from another angle. Lauren, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me today. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see that and hear me okay?
Yes, Lauren, the sound in here is quite quiet, so if you can speak as loudly and clearly as you can.
Okay. Thanks so much. Can you hear me better now? I hope so. My name is Lauren Carruth. I'm a professor at American University, and I'm also an anthropologist. I've been conducting ethnographic research with humanitarian organizations within them, and as well as within communities receiving humanitarian aid in the Horn of Africa for about 20 years on and off. Focusing on Eastern Ethiopia, the Somali region of Ethiopia. And as an anthropologist, I'm really trying to understand the changing humanitarian system as a culture. So in doing so, I'm trying to ask questions like, whose knowledge, expertise, skills, and principles matter and why? Who gets deemed a humanitarian? How is humanitarianism and the global humanitarian system changing and being challenged? You know, when I came at this, I think going to graduate school and learning about the system, and what I was taught were these traditional Western humanitarian epistemologies. And when I say epistemologies, I mean just a system of knowing and understanding and working within these systems. You know, and they were dominated by powerful institutions like the Red Cross, the UN, big international NGOs, and major donor governments, including my own, like USAID. And the intellectual foundations were in international law, political theory, philosophy, and medicine. And you can see here some of the major actors, the big thinkers in the field. Henri Dunant from ICRC, or who originally founded what became the ICRC, Bernard Kouchner, Hugo Slim, and even Michael Barnett. You know, these are the big thinkers. And as you all know, in the 20th century, so different humanitarian organizations led by the ICRC articulated these fundamental principles of humanitarian action: impartiality, neutrality, and independence. And these reflect and sort of supported this idea that humanitarian responses were unidirectional from, you know, donor countries sending resources and expertise to recipient countries, that they were ideally temporary, and of course, that they were apolitical. And, you know, I also came up at a time of big reforms in the humanitarian sector. From the 1990s through the 2000s, it was an era of professionalization. For the last 15 years, there's been a focus on localization. In different words, I remember Christina Bennett said relief agencies must let go of their power and control. Dagan Ali and Marie Rose, Romaine Murphy, and others talked about how relief agencies must address their own racism and work to decolonize aid. And so as an anthropologist, I was sort of interested in studying how this played out on the ground in the field. And what I found in working in the Somali region of Ethiopia was this thing that I'm translating as semafal, that sort of somewhat translates as humanitarianism in the Somali language. But it's really this sort of alternative or even subaltern, sort of minoritized or marginalized epistemology, a way of knowing and understanding what it means to be humanitarian. And it's just a thought experiment. It's sort of fun to think about the fundamental principles, not of the ICRC and not of humanitarianism through these Western epistemologies and ways of knowing, but the fundamental principles of semafal. And this is in contrast to what Somalis termed Bani Adam Nimada, or international interventions. So let's look at some of these fundamental principles of semafal. The first, and sort of maybe the most fundamental one, was this idea of all of our interdependence and how our interdependence required sort of reciprocity and the radical redistribution of resources. And I remember this, this leader of the government health agency in the Somali region of Ethiopia. He had worked at international NGOs for many years, Dr. Hamza. He told the story about how, you know, if there's a drought maybe and a family loses livestock and they're not able to produce enough milk to feed their family, how, you know, everyone has a container of milk outside their front door. And what you should do in the morning is to make sure that all of your neighbors have enough milk. And everybody in the neighborhood, knowing that that person was suffering, that their animal had died or was grazing somewhere else, would come and contribute some milk to the container. And everyone would do that so that the person in need, so that their container wasn't empty, but it was overflowing. And that person who began in need in the morning would then by noon maybe be sharing their own milk with others. So this radical idea of redistribution, he said, quote, "We share, that's how we have enough." A second fundamental principle of Samafal would have to be care. And this was really care and love given and received in the name of God, as almost all Somalis are Muslim. And so that helped them frame this interpersonal acts of care. Another guy, Musa, who worked for a small European relief agency in the city of Jigjiga in Eastern Ethiopia, he said, Allah will help the one who gives. If I have even one birr, the Ethiopian dollar, I try to give it away to him, to the man in need. And most people do this. It is our culture. We share what we have. That is who we are. We're the same people, all of us, the same blood. And when you do this, the people will know. People would see if I was doing this work professionally and not living it. What you're doing and saying in the community, it has to be what you are. If I'm not practicing, they will know. You should not go to a hotel, but you should sleep there with them. And then they'll know you're serious. Third would really be the principle of kinship. And kinship isn't something that is biologically or genetically determined or, quote, bred in the blood, bred in the bone, as British anthropologist of Somalis, I.M. Lewis, has written. Instead, among most Somalis I know, kinship and family are social constructs. They are forged through acts of care and through Samafal, caring for people in need. And this older man once recited this Somali proverb to me, demonstrating this. He said, "Don't say that the man was closer in blood to me, but say that he was good to me. People will not forget that." So forging kinship, these acts of care, these relations of interdependence, they're all also political. Somalis working for aid agencies in Ethiopia saw themselves as not just helping individuals in need, but also building a Somali government, Somali forms of governance, and building Somali power and independence even within Ethiopia. Samafal was about demonstrating this political power, building it through acts of care in particular. And so these fundamental principles, at least these four that I've listed here, they really produce these alternative responses and relationships that are different from those that are generated through traditional Western humanitarian epistemologies. Instead, these are responses and relationships that are both enduring over time and political. So I wanted to bring up a couple of conclusions. I know we're running over, so I'll be really brief. The first one is that Samafal is still mostly seen by the international actors and policymakers I spoke with as a Somali translation only, or a Somali interpretation or implementation of Western humanitarian models. But I'm arguing it's not just anecdotal or even just Somali at all. It's what happens maybe when localization really works. And it's what happens when humanitarianism, otherwise, another form of humanitarianism, is recognized, funded, and empowered. And in the Somali region of Ethiopia, it's having significant political effects, for example, by helping fund and enhance the reputation of the Somali regional government in Ethiopia, a constitutionally autonomous region. It thus even represents, in part, perhaps, the decolonization of Ethiopia, Somalis would suggest, and also perhaps, in part, the decolonization of the humanitarian sector. So second, I also want to say that I think there are multiple and alternative and even subaltern humanitarian epistemologies and ethical systems at work in all humanitarian responses. including that which I'm translating as Samathal, with the principles of interdependence, care, kinship, and political solidarity. And these are powerful, even beyond the Horn of Africa, in Geneva, Washington, and even London too, I think. I think we hold these principles dear as well and act through them as well. And as the humanitarian system progressively localizes over time, these alternative subaltern ways of being humanitarian will only become more powerful, I think. Thanks so much.
We've got about half an hour left for Q&A, so I'm going to hand over to Lucy. I'm going to bring a mic over here, and there's a microphone. If audience members have questions, I will come and bring it to you.
Great, thank you to all the speakers there. And I mean, I'm just itching to sort of start getting in on the debate, because there's a lot that Lauren's just talking about that was reflected in the work that Boel and IID and our partners have been doing. But I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to take over. But what I can do actually is before we get to take questions from the room and online, I can hand over to Jacqueline Wanyonyi, who IID has been working with across a number of projects, just based in Nairobi. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about alternative research and data collection methods and how those can help us get at different understandings and broader understandings of well-being. So Jacqueline, if you're there, I'm going to hand over to you for sort of 4 or 5 minutes or so, just to talk a little bit about the work you're doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucy. So very briefly, we have been conducting various ethnographic interviews here in Nairobi. The projects are funded by IKEA and AHRC. So essentially, these are walking interviews for both our research output, which will be a journal article, a blog, and a policy brief. And also for our visual output, we are working on 2 documentaries. So the intention is to gain further understanding on how urban refugees within Nairobi and its environs are able to navigate urban life and how they're able to...
Jacqueline, sorry, are you able to speak a bit louder and a bit closer to your mic? Because it's quite quiet for us in the room. So sorry to interrupt, but we're not quite catching all of everything you're saying.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me now?
Say a bit more. If you could just speak up, that would be great.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're just a bit quiet, Jacqueline. Can you speak up, I think, basically?
Yeah, okay, it's on maximum. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better, I think.
All right, so we have been conducting ethnographic interviews in Nairobi for 2 projects funded by IKEA and AHRC. So essentially, these are walking interviews for both our research outputs, which will be a journal article, a policy brief, and a blog, and also for our film outputs, which are 2 documentaries. And so the intention is to gain further understanding on how urban populations within Nairobi and its environs are able to navigate urban life and how they're able to develop relationships of trust, cooperation, and peace within their own urban refugee networks, and also with host communities, in light of the uncertainty that they find themselves in protracted displacement. And so the idea is to understand refugee well-being from the lens of refugees themselves. So our interviews are essentially focused on interviewing refugees only, unlike other interviews that will probably bring on board service providers that will give a second-hand account on displacement. And hopefully then from our recommendations, we'll be able to give recommendations to stakeholders on how they should probably tailor make their interventions towards enhancing refugee well-being. And so we have been working with community navigators, who we call fixers, and these are urban refugee mobilizers that have helped us bring on board our participants that are currently displaced in Nairobi. And so they have ensured that we have very rich data as far as enabling us to have a very good mix as far as, say, urban geographies. So we have urban refugees who are currently living in, say, Kawangware, in Mathare slum, in Eastleigh, in Ruiru, and all of these geographies are, they represent different social strata. Some are slums, some are richer neighborhoods, etc. We have also focused on refugees that have been displaced for more than 8 years and above, and also looked at gender diversity as far as looking at cisgender, male, female, and also refugees from the LGBTQI plus community. We've also looked at having national diversity, and so most of our participants are displaced from the region, say from Congo, from Burundi, from Somali, from Ethiopia, from South Sudan, and from Uganda. And some of them have actually been displaced more than once or twice before they were displaced to Kenya. And some of them have also gone through secondary displacement within Kenya, and also looking at different age groups as well. And so the methodology itself is walking interviews. That's the ethnographic research, whereby we take a whole day. We work with each participant. They're able to map out places of interest to them. And then we're able to, and this is usually in their neighborhoods or other areas within the city and its environs. And then we're able to ask open-ended questions from which they have, they're free to either answer or not answer. And so this gives them a level of comfort and enhances the trust between researcher and participant. We also seek feedback after each walking interview, just for us to enhance the process for subsequent interviews, and also to develop the film questions for subsequent film walking interviews. So some key findings or interesting findings that we have been able to identify is that we have very rich data as far as looking at the vulnerabilities faced by urban refugees, and also then tying this with their coping mechanisms. So for instance, language, some of them spoke of language barriers. So Swahili is our national language here in Kenya. And so without the knowledge of Swahili, then they are not able to integrate well within Kenyan society. And so they have employed very creative ways of learning Swahili out of, formal school. So some of them have told us they have, say, taken a Kenya Rwanda Bible and bought a Swahili Bible, and then made a comparison between the words and have learned Swahili and now are proficient in it. Some of them have taken up various casual jobs within the city and have been insulted, not knowing that these were insults in Swahili. And so what they used to do is turn this around and, just take it positively and, write down these words and then learn the language progressively. And so they're also proficient. Another vulnerability, for instance, is host competition in business. So most of them are in informal business. And so they find themselves that they're in direct competition with host businesses. And so to avoid conflict or to mitigate it, some of them have resolved to sell their goods and products exclusively from their homes as a coping mechanism. And others have decided to integrate their culture within the products and services that they offer, so that then they create a market niche that is not in direct competition with what the product offerings for hosts are. We've also identified very many themes, and so these will come in handy as far as our film outputs are concerned. We've also focused on conviviality, how community organizations support them in their day-to-day within urban life, and also with their relations with hosts. We've also focused on their capacities, because most of them have skills that they came with before displacement, and how they're able to use these skills in displacement, if at all they're able to, and also their future aspirations, which is very difficult to capture in standard surveys. And so they talk about wanting to be self-sufficient, wanting to be self-reliant for the future as a future aspirations. More importantly, they're also—
Sorry, Jacqueline, we kind of need to wrap up. I'm sorry. Can you just sort of closing remarks so we can open up to the room? Sorry.
Okay, we're also able to talk about their mental health challenges, traumatizing events, thoughts of self-harm in displacement. And so to tie these up, then our recommendations will be in the lines of how do we enhance coping mechanisms, and how do we tailor make stakeholder interventions towards enhancing coping mechanisms. An interesting one, and this is the final one, is that most refugees talk about their undying hope and loyalty towards the UNHCR. And we have been working with different levels of government, both at national level and at city level. And so the idea is to, or the recommendation is, how can city government also, have the same level of importance in the minds of refugees as the UNHCR is for them, especially since they are within their jurisdiction, and to enable them to improve their refugee well-being, especially as they seek services from city government. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And I think this method of walking around the city with refugees has been very, very powerful. And part of the project is funded by the IKEA program. And there we're looking at LGBTQ+ refugees and people with intersex children, and talking about their experiences in the city. And it's by spending a whole day, first of all, preparing with the interview participants, and then another day actually filming with them as well. And getting this kind of really rich sort of ethnographic data about what it means to be a refugee in the city. And with those films, this is the next stage where we start to show those. To basically, it's about showing the sort of humanity of refugees, the struggles that they have in the city, that these are people with needs, with aspirations, who are trying to get along, who are trying to build relationships, and to try and sort of get over some of this stigma and change the narrative about refugees, who they are and where they belong. So that's it's a great snapshot from Jacqueline, and please sort of, you'll be able to find out more about that project as it evolves on IIED's website. So now it's my job to open up to the room and the online room. So people are posting in the chat. So should I open I'm not quite sure how to do this, but I should probably open the chat on the screen, and then everyone will be able to see what's going on. Sure. Okay, but if there's anyone in the room, Ollie,
okay, well,
has got the mic.
A quick round in the room and then in the chat, and go back to the panelists.
Hi, thank you. My name is Mural, and I'm from Christian Aid Program Quality Manager. So I was really, really glad to hear, Salah, that you were talking about safeguarding and CFRM mechanisms. So that was fantastic. And I have a couple of two questions. And Lauren, what you were saying and those principles really resonated with me. And I think in a way it's more realistic, those principles, than those that we seem to be sort of like standing on humanity, impartiality, and so on, in a stage or age where humanitarian crises, are so political and so protracted. So I wonder, in your research or your study, do you look into the suitability or the standing of those principles that we have as humanitarians, even when we know that that they're not necessarily realistic? And do you look into how communities perceive those principles, or if they even, kind of like know them at all, that we should be standing by those? And Salah, a question for you. What were the community, in the SELR approach, what did the community invested, let's say, the projects on? What kind of projects did they look into, and were they significantly different, for example, than those that you would have done if you were sort of like looking into donors' requirements, etc.? Did you find that different? Thank you.
So I think we're going to take a round of questions. So hold on to your answer, Salah, for that one, and we'll come to you once you've had a few more questions. I can't see anything in the chat online.
Okay, I had a couple of questions. The first one was for our first speaker, whose name I didn't catch, but
Her name is Boel Makatir. She's a
Boel.
researcher at IIED.
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting research, but I just wondered whether you noticed any difference in finding. Most of them, I can understand that people, would want to score well on economic well-being and on representation and things like this. But then the issues around feeling at home and sort of optimism and that side of things, whether there was any sort of differences in those findings, because certainly, some refugees, they might want to settle, but many, in my experience, are just waiting to go home. So, almost by trying to get them to have a feeling of being at home now, are we not trying to force them to relocate? So I just wondered whether that was something you had come across. And then again, for you, Salad, I mean, I really was interested in your project, but then again, did you come across, or do you come across conflicts of interest between what the communities and how they want to do stuff and what we as humanitarians would think as being the appropriate way? And I say that because in Afghanistan, there is definitely a way of doing humanitarian work within community and looking after communities, whereas we don't subscribe to that, and therefore we are making it really difficult for the Afghan community to help themselves because we don't agree with the way they do it.
Is there just perhaps one more? Anybody? Yeah. Kevin.
Thanks. It was for Boel. Just with respect to the project. I hope I didn't miss something, but the location and the people in cities versus camps are really non-equivalent groups, and I just wanted to know to what extent you looked at the differences, because obviously they aren't there by random chance, which seems fundamental to understanding what the difference of interpreting the differences that you see.
Should we go with a quick round of answers and then
Yes, great. So shall I turn first to Boel? And I can also chip in on some of those on the research project. Sure.
Thank you. I will start with the location question, because hopefully it's a quick answer. The choice of locations were really dictated by the camps that we could get into. that's on a sort of research permit scale. In Ethiopia, which is the main one where there's a discrepancy between the population in Addis Ababa is really quite different from the population. It's a different population altogether. That's because the war broke out in between. We had planned to do the research in a camp in Tigray, because that would be the corresponding population to the one in Addis Ababa, which is why we instead got a camp in Afar. So we're very aware, that those two populations are very, very different. And Dadaab, we got permit to go into Dadaab, and then we went to the corresponding population in Nairobi, and the same in Jordan and Afghanistan.
Just to say, we are able to look at levels of education, age, gender. We have control for all of that. And we are aware that the populations are different, and we can actually tell you when we go into the data about who has gone to the city and who has stayed behind, and make those comparisons. So it's not just us doing it, we're working with a bunch of statisticians who are really quite well trained. So we're not, we're safe on that one.
Thanks, Lucy. And on the feeling at home question and optimism, I think that's a really, really interesting one. And I tend to go for the qualitative side of that, because I think they're really interesting answers we actually pose the question, do you feel at home here? And a lot of people refer to the community when they say, yes, I feel at home with my neighbors, I feel at home with my friends, I feel at home with the family that I have here, or the connections that I've made here. Interestingly, a lot of people still say, but I would go home tomorrow if the war ended. And I think that, of course, there's a personality in that. Some people say absolutely not. There was a Somali woman who said, I wouldn't even know, Eritrean woman who said, if Mecca wasn't in the same direction, I wouldn't even look towards Eritrea again if I didn't have to do it every day when I was praying. So it really varies. But I think there is an interesting point in what you're saying around resettlement, because in instances where people are really made not to feel at home by policy, really. And I think specifically about Addis Ababa as the sort of most hostile environment from the ones that we've worked in. There, people say, you know, I feel at home with my neighbors in my community, but I can't stay here because of the policy. I can't live, I can't work. Therefore, the only option is to go somewhere else. And that's really impacts how people feel as well. Do I pass to Salah?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. If I may respond to the first question about the principles and of SELR. Yeah, it is a new idea, and we are trying to do our best and see that it works for us, although there's that thing of maybe the safeguarding issue that could be misused. It can be politicized. We work for very diverse communities, maybe communities that have got history of fighting. And because I am born there and I come from there could be a situation where maybe you have assisted one community, and when the second community comes, you are unable to assist the second community. Like in the recent droughts, we have a lorry. The lorry is not covered. It belongs to the organization. It has no budget. The first team came, the situation was so bad, and then we were able to give them at least the lorry to supply water to the communities. And these are 70 communities. Everybody came. You don't have the money. What happens? Of course, in such a situation, you expect the issue of safeguarding to be misused, because they'll not be convinced that we don't have the resources. And of course, they will raise issues. We are experiencing something small like that, but we were able to explain ourselves to the communities, and we didn't have much challenge. But we know it's going to be a challenge in the future, because in such a diverse situation, of course, you will expect a lot of backlash. The communities will not be happy with what you are doing, because you may not be able to do something, and the communities will not be ready to listen. That is possible. I'm not sure if I answered your question. And the other thing is about the kind of projects. In fact, I said we are just concluded implementing our second project of GBP around 50,000 each. And the kind of projects that we've seen people implementing is about production, climate smart agriculture. People are doing kitchen gardening. People are doing water projects for the communities, expansion of ponds, maybe reducing the distance to water points. There's some piping that the community has decided that we do for them. Like I can remember a place where they've been doing 8 kilometers every day just to get 20 liters on their back. We were able to reduce that one to 2 in one project. And then there's that cash transfer for most vulnerable members of the community in the times of hardship. What we do here is that we had distributed family works to families, because at least they continuously monitor the situation of their families. This is done with health volunteers, in partnership with the health volunteers. And we are able to identify the most vulnerable members of the community through that. And we were able to do cash transfer for such families, multi-purpose cash transfer, around Kenyan shillings 8,960 to take care of food, clothing, and other things. We were able to do that. And the other one is, household food security. At least there was a situation where we are giving grants to the communities. The communities can borrow the money and maybe initiate something, some small businesses, maybe return the money with some small interest. That is the kind of projects that we have so far seen. And there are so many of them. They are related. Most of them are related, and they revolve around maybe what I mentioned. And the other one is a conflict of interest. Yeah, it is there. We have a situation where we have elites in a group, because we are working through self-help groups. We have elites who want to, we have elites among the communities who want to take control of the project, put in their interest. And one thing that we need to know is that we are working within a community, some members of electric communities who are not ready to talk ill about one another. So Sometimes there are situations we have such situations, but because we are also locals, we were able to get such information. There were a couple of issues we were able to resolve. But as much as we can, we make sure that it goes as per the principles of the CLR. You either do it the way the principles want. When we see everything is not going right, we can make another decision still. Yeah.
I think that was a question for Lauren. Online
Yes, there was a question for Lauren, but I'm going to jump in and also answer this question about the idea of feeling at home, because I think it was me that put that question in the survey. And I was very determined to explore some of this, because the point about the research was really to be looking at how urban areas could be more welcoming, more productive, safer, better places for refugees, recognizing that life is difficult there, but isn't it better than the camp? And this question of feeling at home came around to this idea that we treat most refugees in urban areas as temporary people passing through, but actually they're residents and they're often there for decades, like 5, 10, 15 years. We're looking at protracted displacement here. And the question is, can we build a home away from home? Can we provide the best possible experience for somebody in exile to live as good a life as possible, given the circumstances? And that was perhaps one, maybe it's fanciful of me to put that question in the survey, but I think it's important to explore what it means to be able to create a decent life for yourself while you're a refugee, and what can the humanitarian community do, and how can it support local governments to make sure that in all its facets that we're doing more to provide that kind of life. Sorry, I've got control of the mic, so I'm going to talk. No, I'm going to hand over to Lauren now. Lauren, yeah.
Thanks so much. And by the way, I love all the love that's happening for the ethnographic methods this morning. It's excellent. I've really enjoyed hearing you all talk about your work. The question was about the suitability of the ICRC principles, I think. And so I'll say methodologically, I spoke with folks working at subnational UN offices, international NGOs, and local Ethiopian, Somali NGOs in Ethiopia. And I've also done work in Djibouti as well. But I haven't done interviews directly with the ICRC employees or people at the Ethiopian Red Cross, for example. And so my answer does not apply to how they might respond to this, but across the board, no one was aware of the principles of the ICRC. No one was aware of the idea of neutrality. I even, I was curious about it because I teach, humanitarian response too. And so I was really just curious what kind of training there was. And there was ethics training, but it was professional ethics and the sort of workplace ethics. And it didn't sort of go beyond that. But it doesn't mean that people weren't operating with ethical systems in mind. And even in the quotations that I gave during my presentation, people were expressing what might be interpreted as humanity or even impartiality. But importantly, that the sort of action, the impartial action across, for example, ethnic or political divisions was in the interest of building Somali governance and demonstrating the sort of good work that is being done by the government. And this is a story which reflects in part, what it means to be in Ethiopia. I realize it's somewhat different in other countries where you don't have this constitutional autonomy, but it is sort of problematic in other places. And you could see this playing out in Ethiopia. On the one hand, you had aid workers who were Somali aid workers who were so excited to sort of cross into Oromia, the neighboring region in Eastern Ethiopia, where there's been a lot of political tension, because they were excited to get to know people there and to build relationships. And, people would talk about that quite a lot, that humanitarian response was one way of sort of building alliances with people in Oromia, even ethnic Oromos. On the other hand, very frequently further south and close to refugee camps where you all have probably been working, further south, as well as in the Afar region of Ethiopia. It was very difficult because, mostly the subnational offices were staffed by people from that ethnic region. And so it was very difficult, for example, for Somalis, there were very few working in the Afar region or in Oromia. And so in a way, despite sort of the possibility for overcoming those distances and sort of building peace and governance, it also sort of reified these ethnic divisions, I think, in potentially harmful ways. At any rate, I think that insight probably happens elsewhere, though. This isn't sort of limited to the Horn of Africa or Somali.
Apparently we have to give up the room, so we may have to close at that point. Can I hand back to you, Ollie?
Yep. Multiple microphones. Sorry, we have to wrap this up. Thank you very much for your patience with the sound issues, but we really, really appreciate you coming. All of us will be around in the cafe afterwards if you wish to catch up, and I will make sure that there is a way to get all of the papers that have been shared in the chat to anyone who registered. But thank you most of all to the panelists for a really, really interesting session. And I guess if there's any takeaway from this, it's kind of the importance of connection and open-ended responses rather than top-down telling people what to do in an atomized and fragmented way. So we'll leave it there. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you very much for the panelists. Thank you. And thank you very much.